Hey all, this is 012 Boku and...
The apple that fell far from the tree, Jherick the Jackass.
Indeed, well played, Jherick. Well, as you guys know, we are going to do his take on... oh, that's my phone. Oh, it's behind me here. Jobs. We will be continuing Jobs, and Jherick will give his take on it, because as you know, my review was already put out, I think a week ago or a week and a half ago, so take it away, Jherick. Give your thoughts.
Yeah, so this one's actually kind of a fun one for me, because I forget, you said you were born in, 86, I believe?
Me, 86, yes.
So you probably grew up with, the first iteration of the Macintosh, probably.
More than likely.
I myself, however, grew up with the Commodore 64, and I'm actually old enough to have been around during the Intellivision days, so... And I actually had a cousin who had an Intellivision. Not the best. Atari 2500 was still way better. But anyways, yeah, I'm old enough to remember, all the shit they cover in this, and it's amazing. Oh, I forgot to bring the fucking movie with me. Hold on one second, people. Yeah, a little something that kind of ties into one of the critical individuals we'll be talking about. For those of you, how should I put this, who have had the glorious disbenefit of having a family member who's obsessed with Apple computers, chances are you know who Steve Jobs is. Heck, maybe your parents were even obsessive enough for you to know who Steve Wozniak is. And it's such an amazing tale. I love how this movie opens up with all of them back in, I forget what college it was. Oh, Berkeley. Back in their Berkeley days, doing the usual hipster shit. They've all got their plaid shirts, their glorious goatees and mustaches. They're all, doing the usual shit you do, smoking pot, learning communist bullshit. Basically hanging out. And I love this, how you see how obsessed he is with classical music, and how you see in his moments of absolute manic thinking, his mind is just kind of spurging out while he's listening to classical, because it's kind of both feeding his autism and at the same time also kind of what's the word? Kind of focusing. No, that's not the right word. More like conducting his mind in the right direction. Kind of like how if you get just a bunch of musicians together, they're all just going to go nuts until you get the conductor there to get everybody focused and on task. Which, by the way, is totally not an analogy for certain aspects of this movie and its subject matter, by the way. But it's a neat thing to see. You can tell this is a man whose mind is always... The wheels are always spinning. The brain is never not on. He's constantly thinking. He's processing. He's analyzing. But it's always in service to only one thing. Or maybe I should say one person. Himself. I mean, if I had to explain Steve Jobs in the most concise way I could think of, I would say, imagine Peter Venkman, but successful, to a degree. I mean, he's not gonna be getting his Dana Sterling in this movie either, or maybe he does and he loses her down the road. Kind of like Peter Venkman in the movies. Now that I think about it. But yeah, it's kind of interesting, seeing him, hanging out with Steve Wozniak. And I kind of love, the impetus for what starts this. They're checking out, all these little homebrew stuff all the geeks are doing at Berkeley, back when you were allowed to do private projects on school grounds and stuff. And I love how you can see, he's looking at it, and then you see him at his working days at Apple, and they got a project, and nobody's able to live up to the ambitions he's got going for this project. So, of course...
Also, really quick, to add on that, because I was curious when you said that. I'm I never knew or heard that. So, and me and my friends never talked about it when I watched the movie, so I looked it up. It was inconclusive. Nobody knows if he really did have autism or not.
Well,
he had all the traits, but nobody knew if he was really diagnosed with it.
Well, see, that's the funny thing. When it's people that, how should I put this, who may or may not have good prospects for moving forward, and everybody else getting to ride their coattails along the way, yeah, they'll overlook it. They'll say, oh, he's eccentric, or he's a genius. They're particular about how they do things. In fact, My grandparents did the same thing with my dad. They didn't want to admit he was, what they would have called crazy at the time. So they just said, no, he's not like the rest of them. He's a genius. They're eccentric. They think differently, which they do. But there's a word for that. It's called autism. But that's the thing. If it's like, this one, he's gonna be nothing. He's just a crazy little autist with his little dyslexia and whatnot. On the other hand, if they think you actually have the potential to do shit, yeah, they overlook it. They don't say anything. It's kind of one of those quiet agreements, It's like, this one's just clever. He's not like you. He thinks differently. This one is just stupid. Put him in the room with all the other Ralph Wiggums.
Yeah. In my opinion, though, given how he was around people, because I know they said the way he reacted around others and stuff, when it came to the business, I could possibly see where that's set up, but honestly, I just think it was what people said. He was just a perfectionist and egotist and an asshole, personally. Because
well, that's the thing. Autism has so many different degrees. Like, if you've ever seen the people who spurg out in public, it's easy to just say, they're either schizophrenic or they're bipolar. Well, newsflash, schizophrenia is kind of like the most extreme version of bipolar you get. You get your basic craziness, you get your autism 1, then you start going up to like bipolar 1, bipolar 2, schizoaffective disorder, schizoaffective borderline schizophrenic disorder, which by the way I have. And then you got like full-blown schizophrenia. And even within schizophrenia, there's multiple little variants of it, different spectrums of schizophrenia. So, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, he's autistic, but he's kind of what they would deem higher functioning. Like, you put him in a work setting, this guy is going to absolutely breeze through everything. You ask him to go to a family reunion, on the other hand, he's going to burn the house down and everyone in it. It's just one of those things, it's kind of like Tony Stark. You put Tony Stark in a project, of course it's going to get done, cheaper, faster. It's like they said in the movie, don't tell me this. Tony Stark got this shit done in a cave with spare parts. You got a lab. What's keeping you from doing it? It's exactly like that. You put him in that setting, he works perfectly. You ask him to interact with family, friends, or anything that isn't a machine, on the other hand, shit's going to go foobar. That's just how it is. That's how people like him are. And strangely enough, Steve Wozniak is not exactly... he's got like a way higher level of brilliance, but he doesn't have like the same... He's not on the same autistic line, for instance. Again, to go back to Ghostbusters, he's got like the Peter Venkman thing. Within his own very limited field, he's brilliant. But like Steve Wozniak is kind of more like Ray Stantz, where you can tell he's brilliant and he's definitely a lot more sociable, but he's also much more socially awkward. He has, like, Wozniak, I would say, has confidence issues, especially around people. Jobs is definitely on the like level of thinking of, say, P.T. Barnum, the guy who founded Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. He's a con artist, he's a grifter, he's a bullshitter, but he's an absolute master at reading at knowing how to read your poker face. He knows how he can look at you, he can engage in a conversation, he can pick up on how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how the conversation's going. To explain it in video game terms, think of like the Deus Ex Human Revolution perk that allows you to analyze how people are feeling as you're having a conversation with them in order to try and figure out what the best line of dialogue to get them to go along with what you need them to do is. It's kind of like that. It's like that level of just crazy social analytical skills. He knows how to understand what you're thinking or how you're processing, which direction you want to go in. But that's about as far as he really goes with people. He doesn't truly engage and interact with them, only so far as, how to manipulate them. That's how I should explain it. Poker. He's basically reading your poker face expertly, but that's as far as he's going to, he's not going to go out with you afterwards for drinks. He's not going to, hang out with you on the weekends. He'll be able to read your ass like a book to be certain at the poker table, but that's pretty much all you're getting out of the man. because that's all he's geared for. He's like the machines he built, specifically designed for one line of thinking, and that's it. Everything else has to be everyone else on the team. Kind of like Hideo Kojima. Hideo Kojima is great at coming up with ideas, concepts, interesting ideas for characters, but don't ask him to write the story. Don't ask him to program the game. That's not his thing. He's good at building hype for the game. He's a good salesman, but he's not a storyteller. He's not a story writer. He's not a guy who's going to craft everything into a cohesive narrative.
Well, into that, I guess a good segue, since you pretty much hit the nail on how he was on the head. That's why, not to like jump around, but when he was finally getting his company going and he built things, like I said in my review, at first, and I mean, I still don't like his board members in this movie, or if that is true to how it happened, how the board members did treat him. But at the same time, too, I could understand how Arthur Rock and the board thought of things, because, again, for his mind and his way of making these machines, at the time, the money would have just been way too expensive to get this going. And again, I sort of sat there and said, they did have a point. The way they were treating Steve shouldn't have been done either, but they did have a point to where Steve would open his mouth, say things, start problems, and then there would be all these money issues. So again, I'd say it was a perfect double-edged sword between the investors and Steve Jobs.
It's a funny thing you bring that up right after I made the whole Hideo Kojima joke, because that's kind of the same problem he had. I mean, he kind of shot his mouth off too much. He went way over budget. He way overhyped things. He had a lot of the same business and managerial skills when it came to like hyping things, when it came to selling, when it came to marketing. But on the other hand, as we've all learned over the years, he's not the story writer. He's not the guy who's going to come up with a genius code craft. He's not going to come up with all the clever. He's not going to know how to tie all the clever gimmicks he's dreaming up into a final package. He'll think up the interesting ideas. He'll know how to sell it, but it's everybody else's job to figure out how to get it all to work together.
Yeah.
And, I mean, going into that, one of my favorite scenes, and one of the earliest ones, is when we see him and Wozniak in the car. He's already promised his boss, what, I'm going to do this, but it's going to be color, it's going to... I forget, like, all the claims, but they're basically talking about Pong, which at the time was, like, the biggest game that came out. Getting that arcade perfect, as ridiculous as this is going to sound, on the Atari 2600... that was a huge technological feat. It was considered absolutely brilliant at the time. I know, it's like just a bunch of blocks, boink, boink, boink. But at the time, that shit was like the same as when Genesis got Altered Beast arcade perfect on the Genesis. It blew people's minds. It was that big of a deal. And, he's in the car with Steve Wozniak, and they're talking about it, and he's like, look, you know how to... It's right after he got him to basically make the prototype that sold this whole idea. And this was this is the first sign of the dickery to come, because... When they were going to Stanford, when he saw his computer code on the TV and wanted to market it. Which, by the way, this was one of Steve Wozniak's biggest mistakes. He should not have shown Jobs this. But anyways, on the other hand, we would have learned how much of a genius Steve Wozniak is without it. But anyways... he tells his boss, look, I'm going to need $700 to make this work. And of course, I think, initially he tells Wozniak, No. He was going to pay him $5,000 to make it work. And then he told Wozniak it was $700. And then before he sees his computer screen, remember, he gave Wozniak $350. Yeah, and by the way, I know that sounds stupid, but $5,000 in, 1979 money is gigantic. But yeah, he tells him, $700, and then he only gives him $350. Which, well, I guess out of $700 that would be correct, but it's still, to lie about $5,000 saved and $700, and then I'm going to give you $350. It's still a pretty big dick move, but yeah. I'm not debating that. I'm just saying, because essentially Wozniak really did all the work on this, and by the way, get used to hearing me say that a lot in this review. By the by, so just a minor spoiler warning there. But it's kind of neat. They're in the car, they're talking about this. It's like we could make this into a thing. We could sell it. And Wozniak is kind of hesitant on it because we'll find out the reason later, and we'll get into that. But he's bouncing the idea off of it. It's like, we need a name for this thing. We need to market it as like nothing Trekky. And I'm like, and me and Boku are both like, oh, come on. Who wouldn't love the Enterprise?
Well, I think one of them when he said is Kirk's Enterprise.
It would have been so great. I mean, with 1980 coming up with the Star Trek movies, it would have been such a great tie-in. But, he's like, no. We need something simpler. We need something that invokes the idea of, like, invention, of human ingenuity. It's like, apple. Like the fruit? Yeah. Like Isaac Newton, the apple, gravity.
Yeah, and he even said, not only part of the gravity, the fruit of creation.
Yeah.
So,
And again, this shows you just how brilliant he is, because even though I still think Kirk's Enterprise would have been great, Apple was legitimately a great idea from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah.
And exactly for the reasons he pointed out.
Then even Wozniak brought up, well, can we do that? Apple Records. Well, what? Do they own the name Apple?
Which, again, an early homage to how crazy, copyright infringement was going to get down the road. Thank you, 1976, by the way. But
which is good for them, because they did that shit right beforehand.
Yeah. But even when you look at the logo, it's got a bite taken out of it, like the apple, in the quote-unquote story of how Newton came up with the gravity formula. Mm-hmm. Total lie, by the way, but hey, it worked. And again, it also kind of reminds me of Newton, because Newton bullshit his way about the whole gravity thing. He was not the guy who came up with the idea of gravity. He was just the guy who created a scientific formula to explain it. But, again, kind of like with Walt Disney and Michael Fleischer. Fleischer was the guy who invented all that cool shit that made the animation of Disney work. Disney was just the guy who knew how to bullshit enough to sell it as his idea. Disney was the marketing man, Fleischer was the genius. Jobs, Wozniak.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a recurring theme in science, by the way. Hey, don't take my word for it. Look it up. It's some of the most absolutely fascinating bullshit in all of history. And again, P.T. Barnum, like really, you people have no idea, the father of modern day con artists in North America. Pretty much the godfather of American grifting. And as far as I'm concerned, pretty much the Steve Jobs might as well be his reincarnation. But I love this scene because he's like, and then I forget how, but they get into a conversation about Beatle, like how Wozniak likes the Beatles. But, was it Wozniak who liked the Beatles?
Yeah, Wozniak liked the Beatles.
And he liked
Jobs like Bob Dylan.
And and trust me, keep that idea in your head. It's going to come back later on in the discussion. Although I'm sure Boku already talked about that in his review.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just neat. And then, we kind of go to the next scene where they're trying to sell this local computer shop on the idea. And, of course, Jobs is doing his usual thing. And it's beautiful watching him just, you can see, it's almost like you're in a Deus Ex game where he's just analyzing everything this guy is saying, trying to figure out the right response to keep this con going. And of course he realizes, it's like we're not going to be able to do this without a better cooling system and power supply.
Oh yeah, because when he was trying to sell, because they did get a hook at Stanford where everybody else thought it was boring. Paul Terrell, a computer store owner, saw it and wanted. They didn't understand this at the time. They thought that Paul Terrell wanted boards, so they make all these boards. And what happens is, before they know it's a computer, like Paul Terrell thought he was going to get one model, but then, Jobs goes in through, okay, I'm thinking of the big picture, and off to the races they go.
Well, and it's beautiful too, because this is also the first scene where we really see Steve Wozniak's ability to learn from his mistakes in real time. Because again, this guy's mind is always thinking, he's always processing, he's always learning. But, it's always just the stuff he wants to learn. It kind of reminds me of Vegeta in that regard, to be honest. But it's just neat to see. So, of course, they have to find a guy who they know can make this idea work. And fortunately, there just happens to be a bit of a hippie motorcycle guy who dresses up like a...
Oh, yeah, Rod Holt, yeah.
Who kind of, dresses up like your typical James Dean Rebel Without a Cause kind of guy. And he's looking over their project. And I love how, in real time, he's kind of explaining, aspects of what he's going to have to do to get this to work to Jobs' specifications. one of the big things I love about this is, like, even if you're not a tech person, seeing these tech guys shoot the shit about how they're going to get this shit to work or what they're going to need to do is some of the most fun shit in this movie. It kind of reminds me of, like, Alden of the Blue Sky when they're explaining the military strategy, which, by the way, Boku introduced me to that amazing anime series. If you love military strategy on a grand scale, check it out. It's amazing stuff.
On the Sky, yeah.
I'd honestly say it's better than Code Geass in that regard. And I love Code Geass. But anyways, it's fun, and again, he's having to get his dream team of nerds together to make this happen. I love how you see, the moment where they're all in the garage working on this stuff to get it going. And by the way, people think that's crazy. No, that actually happened. I mean, some of the earliest teams that were programming video games, they were all just a bunch of nerds hanging out in their garages just doing this shit as a hobby.
Yeah.
That's not a myth. That was real history.
Yeah, and to give you guys a rundown of it, let's see, because I think I wrote down all their names. Because like you guys know, we mentioned Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Daniel Kotke, Rod Holt, Bill Fernandez, let's see, I think I got him. Chris Espinoza, I think, and then I think Burl Smith was his other friend who all came together to help him build this thing. But the thing is, it's during that time, and the funny thing is, we never see them when they go back to Paul Terrell when they do the first Apple, because already they're on the Apple II in his garage. And the funny thing is, though, it's when they're trying to build the Apple II and do all these things where the madness of Jobs starts coming out, because I'll mention as a quick side thing, he gets his girlfriend, Chris Ann Brennan, pregnant. He refuses to deal with it. Kotke actually tries to console her and says it's not you, it's him, and then he starts getting mad with Kotke. He actually starts bowing up to Wozniak a little bit.
And one of my favorite scenes is kind of the next thing after that, where they're kind of at the tech show with the first demo.
Which we'll also mention, that's where Mike Markula came into the picture and offered them big time money to go to this conference to get their Apple II off the ground.
Well, and I love this scene because, this is the first scene where we see Steve Jobs, change up his attire and his physical appearance.
Yeah, because for the first part of the movie, he's in that hippie look, and then he starts going for the whole clean cut.
Well, yeah, because he's got he's got the white undershirt with the vest. He's got the clean fit. All the other guys still kind of got their regular nerd drip on, but you can see him. He's starting to trim the facial hair a little. He's getting the cleaner clothes. He's got the look on. And this is kind of where we really start to see the demon rear its head. And yes, I am going to refer to it as a demon.
No, that's right, because when you see him in those scenes, he doesn't look like what we saw him at the beginning of the movie, where the genius was there, but then the way to get the power and the money, all came.
And you could tell he was doing it because, this is the image I need to project to ingratiate myself to all these other guys.
To all these other people, yeah. Because again, it's the business. It's not how to make the computer. It's the business.
And I kind of glossed over this during the Berkeley stuff, but I do love that we have scenes of them going to India. They're all brushing up on Hinduism, Buddhism, all that good philosophy stuff. And we do see that Steve Jobs is actually thinking about some of this stuff. He's incorporating ideas from Buddhism and Hinduism. And interestingly enough, I mentioned this to Boku during the review, when you really look at how Steve Jobs behaved, interestingly enough, he's a prime example of what I would call the dark Zen. For those of you who don't understand the concept of Zen Buddhism, it's the idea of emptying all of yourself into a singular mindset, a way of one, where you're at one with whatever you're doing. Most people think, to be Zen, you have to be happy. It's that's positive Zen. Negative Zen, you could be pissed off, you could be psychotic. Mm-hmm. You could literally be chasing a man down to just skin his ass alive in the streets. But it would still be Zen. It would be dark Zen.
Well, again, when you think about it, too, for him it was another double-edged sword, because personally, in his mind, what would make him happy was to make a good business and a good product succeed, and in a way he did that.
Well,
and also, too, to add to it really quickly, because one thing we both did, well, I mentioned him a little bit, but what I mentioned here, too, is, again, James Woods, who plays Jack Dudman in this movie, very short supporting main character role right at the beginning of the movie. I don't know if he was a teacher or a dean, but he was even allowing, because by this time in the movie starts, Jobs was already a dropout, but Jack Dudman told him, no, I don't care if you're a dropout, stay in school, go to classes.
Yeah, he's
learn something. He's encouraging him to learn, even though he's not a part of the university whatsoever.
He can see that he's got drive and ambition, and he doesn't want him to waste it, but Steve Jobs can tell, it's like, I'm not a tech guy. He can clearly, I believe at this point he could tell, I'm more of a marketing guy, I'm a design man. I'm not one of the tech guys. I can clearly tell this is not something I'm into, but like something more like design, marketing.
Well, tech and even I think he said something with books, because he was going over how the college system sorted, which again, when we learn about what we learn about now, is sort of correct about college, where you don't get everything in there, and you're not guaranteed always a career from college. And Steve and Jack Dudman went about it in the way that I could understand, but I forgot how they said it. But that's what it was in a nutshell. It limits you, and you're not guaranteed everything right out of the box.
And that's another interesting thing you bring up, because Steve Jobs kind of, I would believe, has like a form of a branch of autism similar to my own, where it's like, I can read at a level much better than most of my peers, but it's not exactly how I learn. I tend to learn more through like direct interaction with something. I have to see it, I have to interact with it. I need to be able to like see, touch, and hear it. That's how I learn. I learn through like audio visual. And a lot of people do nowadays. And I think Steve Jobs knew this about himself. He knew he wasn't a book guy. It's like he could read the words, he could understand it. Hell, he could probably understand it better than the professors could. But that's not how his brain processes things. He processes things by being in the thick of it. And then again, this kind of goes to like poker players. Poker players are like that. They need to be in the moment. They need to be, everything needs to be like, they need to be in the thick of it. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't like make sense. It doesn't sink in.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing. There's a lot of different ways people's minds work. Like, some people are what they would call abstract thinkers. They're thinking well outside the boundaries of the normal ways of thinking is how they do things. They're the creative types, artists, musicians. Then you got the more linear thinkers, the scientists, the mathematicians, the technicians. And the funny thing is, like, it even gets further subdivided between men and women. Women allegedly use both halves of their brain. Well, one half is for creative thinking, the other half is for linear, logical thinking. Men allegedly only think with the cold logical half. So, even within like male-women dichotomy, or even like just standardized learning, there are so many different degrees of it.
Well, and the funny thing is, the one thing I can appreciate about these biopics that my friend Thunder showed me with a few of these is that even though these folks are who they are, some of them have been good people, as you'll see later on when we get to more movies that I don't know if you've seen, or if I've seen. Well, I've seen them, but I don't know if you've seen them, or if they're just sort of that myth wrapped in madness, sort of like Steve Jobs. But again, what I can appreciate was he wanted to be hands-on with his company. Maybe a little too much so, but he wanted to know the products he was making. Because, the Lisa, the Macintosh,
and again,
great ideas, great stuff, but then he would get too voicey, go way too far, and then from his developers to the investors, his board, everybody was just that, because it's when his Apple company, because we don't see the beginning of Apple. The movie moves on to Apple being there and big, and it's just him doing it, but we could see where he's so focused on his projects and making money and keeping his power, to where he starts cutting out his friends. He still has not seen, which the DNA test, Chris Ann Brennan, that is her daughter is also his daughter, so, but he does not want to pay the child alimony. He's rich, but he doesn't want to give her anything, and all these things. And because, again, legal rights, because just because you ignored the child doesn't mean she's not going to come at you with alimony. And she does, and I hate to say it, right on her to do so, because he basically abandoned her and the kid, and people say, yeah, but he never wanted. Well, they should have had sex, plain and simple.
And the thing that I think that that all of this movie really perfectly demonstrates about how Steve Jobs was basically one of the most destructive men in the tech industry is the very thing that's kind of destroying video games and movies to this day, and that's the idea of legacy.
Yeah. These
guys are such, they're geniuses, but they're also kind of full of themselves. They want to micromanage everything because this is their legacy. This is their baby. Like, for those of you who are a bit more open-minded about researching history from a more truthful standpoint, look into the absolute madness of how Lincoln micromanaged the Civil War. Like, people have no idea, but the very first battle of Frederickson, they suffered so badly losses to General Lee and
Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg to Lee and the Confederates that people were speculating they would have to do an unconditional surrender right then and there unless.
Well, because I mean, heck, you saw it in the biopic movie Gods and Generals. It was bad, and then. Heck, they were, what was it, General Winfield Scott, which when we see those, we'll probably go over that in detail too, but just said, since you brought it up, he said, let's go in and occupy the town now. They're not there yet. And he's like, no, I'm not going to make the same mistakes as that. I was given a presidential mandate. We'll stay on these orders. Well, South got in there, and yes, they bombed the town and destroyed the town, but they couldn't get beyond the heights, and that's where they needed to get to, and that was open field, no man's land, and the Union Army was slaughtered in that battle.
You could look at like the disaster of the Avengers movie Age of Ultron. Like Tony's got this great idea. I'll just put an AI in all of my Iron Man suits and they'll police the world. And of course he doesn't want to listen to the man from 50 years ago telling him, I've seen this sort of idea tried. This will not work. It will be a disaster. Well, no.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, it's like, take away that shield and what are you? It's like, oh yeah, well, take away the suit. What are you? Billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. Doesn't mean you can't be wrong, though. And we're going to see that a lot with Steve Jobs, by the way.
And too bad, because they had to go, since you brought that up, since they had to go with Hank Pym, the martyr, it couldn't have been Hank Pym helping him build the thing, because Hank Pym made the design, Tony just helped him build it.
Which, by the way, the comics, it was Hank Pym who builds Ultron, just for the record.
Well, and again, like they said, it's something they worked together because Hank Pym did build it, but Tony did help with it. But, Hank Pym is the designer. Tony just helped him build it.
But anyways, getting back to the thing, like, and after, like, after the floor show doesn't go so good, you see him calling up all these different places getting rejected, but Mike Mendel is the guy who comes
Mike Marcola.
Mike Marcola, sorry. Mike Marcola is the guy who comes back.
Yeah, because that's My Pillow.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, he won that lawsuit.
Oh, I heard, yes. Excellent Mike Mendel, yes.
But anyways, yeah, it's actually, and this is where we start to see, like we've already seen the rise of the demon inside of him, but this is where it's really going to take off, and we start to see like Apple once it's become the established the it brand of the '80s, because they actually bring up a very interesting point in this, we're seeing him in this. He's now got the full suit, he's got the more professional look. And I
don't know if it's true or not, but parking in the handicapped space.
No, that happened a lot in the 1980s. A lot. In fact, I've had family members who have held on to their relatives' handicapped parking slips just so they could use the parking space spots. So, I mean, hey, as long as you don't tell about it, I won't either. But anyways, yeah, and all of his old friends are still at Apple, but you can see he's brushing them off because, hey, I mean, he's a big shot now. He's got to think the big thoughts, and it's really indicative of the man that he is and the man he will always be. But it's interesting because we can see the looks on their faces. They can see it's like, yeah, we got you here, but do you even remember us? Like he's not even looking at him most of the time.
Well, remember Kottke. And I don't know if it was Chris Ann Brennan Kottke wanted to talk to her about or something else, but Kottke left after Steve kept rejecting him. And then not only that, there's a part where even Mike Marcola was shocked that Steve wanted to cut out everybody from his. And the thing is, I don't think he cut out Wozniak. At least I don't think he cut out Steve Wozniak. But at the same time, he cuts out everyone else from royalties except for Rod Holt. And he says, yeah, Rod did his part. Well, what about Chris Kopke and everybody else? And he's like, no, none of them. They don't get anything.
Yeah, but the sad thing is, I think he didn't, whether he did cut out Wozniak or not, he kind of didn't have to, because this is going to lead to one of my favorite scenes. But first,
Daniel Kopke, I keep calling him Grizzly.
But first, we get the moment where he's on the I believe it was called the Lydia Project.
Lisa, the
Lisa. Which, by the way, I wonder if that was the reason why the Simpsons went with Lisa Simpson.
Yeah.
But anyways, and of course Steve Jobs he's being Steve Jobs, and he's holding up the project and making it too expensive to be economically feasible.
And he also, I think, when the Lisa was being built, isn't that when Arthur Rock said he badmouthed IBM, saying they were a separate
I was about to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, was something I remember from when I was a kid, because I saw these advertisements in the magazines and comic books I was reading. I wish I still had a few of them, but hey, you just watch the movie, you'll get it. But yeah, he puts out a full-page ad insulting IBM. It's like, oh, how cute, you guys finally got into personal computers after we already revolutionized the field. And I love that this is the impetus for the board of directors really getting pissed off with him, because up until then, up until he was really going out of his way to piss off IBM with his success, they were largely just the best typewriters and a few other, really high-end calculators or other slide rules or other, instrumentation. They weren't really doing PC. Then he had to be a little snot-nosed shit and piss off, Microsoft, and now they're in the PC game.
Well, that's when he made the Macintosh, and, the Macintoshes are a thing, and look at our stuff and how good it is. And then remember, Bill Gates had the thing, but they don't go over it in the film, but my friends have told me this when we watched the film together. Bill Gates did get that first, not Jobs. I know they make it look like Jobs had that first, but no, it's been proven Bill Gates made that before Jobs got the Macintosh out. So
yeah, and they do kind of mention that in brief in the movie.
Yeah, very briefly. Yeah.
But this is kind of like the first moment where Steve Jobs accidentally makes Bill Gates into the most powerful man in the world. So if you hate Bill Gates half as much as I do, you can thank Steve Jobs for that. But hey, Steve Jobs being a jobber for Bill Gates. Yeah, I know somebody out there knows what I'm talking about. But this is...
I think a lot of people do. Jobbers a commonly used word now.
Jabronis.
Not just a wrestling term no more.
But, with him basically pissing off all of his old people, basically cutting them out of the money they should have gotten, and worst of all, putting a fire under IBM's ass to become the biggest in the world, we see one of arguably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Now, before I mentioned, how Steve Wozniak mentioned, oh, come on, you're more of a Bob Dylan guy and I'm more of a Beatles kind of guy. Well, this is honestly the most heartbreaking scene in the entire movie, and for me, this is the movie that really shows that Ashton Kutcher is wasting his talent. Him and the guy who played Steve Wozniak, this is
Josh Gad.
This is one of the best breakup scenes I've ever seen in anything, ever.
Well, before you explain it, dude, and I know how you were starting to get sad there, let me just say, too, while he was still dealing with stuff from the Lisa and the board members, and Mike Markula was still trying to help him out with that, they kicked him off. He goes to build the Macintosh, like we said. And believe it or not, he got all his old team together. The old spark was there.
Yeah.
He even got Wozniak off his project, which he was bored. They built the Macintosh together. But even in that the montage clip of them building the Macintosh together, you saw where Wozniak was saying, I'm having fun, this is a good thing. But you could see his face where it's like, as soon as this is done, the old Steve's going to return. And it did. And you can go ahead with what you were going to get in there.
And that's sad because he kind of got his whole team back by, playing upon their emotions.
He was happy. That's why I brought it up. Wozniak was happy they were building this machinery again because it's what they did starting Apple.
And
it was fun. It was challenging. It was what brought them together. But then it's like Wozniak's like, this is not gonna last.
And I love how he waits until like it's late at night. Nobody's at the office.
But also, let's say before you continue, by this time the Macintosh. Oh, I'll also say too, we probably should mention, by this time the Macintosh was an expensive piece of equipment that they built, but by this time as well, he also brought in, where's his name, under Matthew Modine, John Scully, a former spokesman of Pepsi, who he bought.
The former head of Pepsi.
And brought him in as an interim CEO, and because the board was still mad at him because he attacked Microsoft. He did this, and apparently the Macintosh was an expensive piece of equipment. The board was starting to move John Scully against him, and he was trying to fight back. And then it was around this time where Wozniak sort of said, we're having fun, but where he was finally coming into him at the same time, and for the second time saying it, but go ahead, I'll let you do the honor, sir.
So he waits until like it's at night, and fights. He doesn't.
And meanwhile, too, remember when Steve is hunched over all these papers trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah. Which, again, like Wozniak, you can almost see, like, in Ashton Kutcher's face, like, Steve Jobs is like, are you here to save me? And you can almost see the pain and the disappointment in Wozniak, knowing that it's almost like a disappointed parent.
And I know I'm not doing it right, but where Wozniak was choking back tears and trying not to be sad about this. I mean, you can tell Steve was sad too, but Steve Jobs is just like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
I'm not processing this until I'm in my car.
and this is my favorite thing, because you can tell this is the moment that broke Steve Jobs, because he probably never believed that he could ever lose control of Steve Wozniak. So Wozniak calling this partnership off probably broke his ass harder than anything else.
Because, again...
Well, except for getting fired from Apple.
Well, because, again, even though he was friends with everybody else and he found some of these guys... Wozniak was his biggest friend out of the group, so losing his, essentially, to coin the phrase, I'm holding out my right arm here, you lose your right arm, who you got left?
It would be like God losing Michael, to be honest, but yeah. But he's like, it's funny, years ago, when we were talking about the name for the first one, you mentioned like the difference between you and me being me, that I'm a Beatles guy and you're a Bob Dylan guy. Wasn't it funny? It's like we've traded places. I become Dylan, and you're the man who broke up the Beatles.
Well, remember,
and I'm like,
he even says, I guess we're like the Beatles now, symbolizing the Beatles breakup.
Well, and it's sad, too, because if I remember, this is only a few years after John Lennon himself got shot,
Well, yeah, he got shot, 1979, 1980, I think?
Yeah. And, I mean, this is, I think it was 1980, if I remember. But, I mean, this is like only a few years removed from that, so that had to really hit hard. And it's kind of true, because Wozniak really was like Dylan, like, just by himself, he was a genius. He never really had, like, the huge initiative to push these things forward.
You mean Jobs, or he's talking Wozniak?
No, I'm talking about Wozniak, because Jobs is more like the Beatles, specifically more like John Lennon, because... Yes, John Lennon is a genius, but in my opinion, without the absolute brilliance, like the lyrical brilliance of Paul McCartney, or the absolute brilliance and cleverness on the guitar of like George Harrison, you kind of don't really get like the huge output. Like he did have some good stuff solo, but it was never the same. He didn't have the musical tapestry of Harrison. He didn't have the lyrical maestro-ness of McCartney, and he just didn't have the heart of Ringo. It wasn't the same. But like with Wozniak by himself is an absolute technical force of nature. And he's also a very kind person, like once you're around Steve Wozniak, you realize, yeah, he's socially awkward, but this is a person everybody can understand. We can all like him. We can work with him. Jobs is exactly like John Lennon. He's brilliant, but he's an egomaniac. He's hard to work with.
He's awkward.
He's a perfectionist, and it's always about him. And this is like, to me, this is the second biggest blow that Steve Jobs ever took in his life outside of getting fired from Apple, was losing control of Wozniak. And Wozniak, you can see the quiet pain in it. Sorry.
Well, no, as I say to give you that, like he says, we built it. This was fun. That's why I'm leaving, because like I told you before, this is no longer fun anymore. This was and this has become something else.
The Beatles reference is actually doubly brilliant in this scene, because it must have been exactly what Paul McCartney felt when the Beatles broke up. For those of you who don't understand what I'm referencing, people oftentimes get it misconstrued that the very last Beatles song, Let It Be, was a John McCartney song. It's not. It was Paul McCartney.
You mean John Lennon?
John Lennon, sorry.
You said John McCartney.
Again, my mouth is moving faster than my head is. But the thing is, like, the story goes, Paul McCartney was so broken up about the friend group breaking up that he went home, and he must have had like an ungodly amount of alcohol in his system, and as he's dreaming, he's thinking about the breakup of his friends, and the ghost of his dead mother, beautiful Mary, comes to him, and he's like, "Mother, my friends are breaking up. What should I do?" And in the dream, she says to him, "Let it be." That's how the song happens. I would like to think that this was Steve Wozniak's Paul McCartney moment.
Oh,
this was
the moment most definitely.
This was the moment when he looks at John Lennon and he's like, it's not the same. You're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And to give you an idea of just the absolute difference, the Unicron versus Primus universe of difference between these two men, I present to you a show that only has Steve Wozniak, I believe, in the first 2 episodes. But in this show, which is about the fall of Atari, through a very naughty and hilarious show about like Atari expressed through pixel graphics, Steve Wozniak is referred to during his Atari days as the Wonderful Wizard of Woz. By the way, Code Monkeys, great show. If you never see this, watch this. This was one of the best things G4 ever did. Just don't watch it in front of children or old people. Or at work, by the way, either. But yeah, it's about like the last days of Apple before, shit hit the fan. Hilarious show, though. I love it. I even love how the show, they reference Apple. It's like, oh, come on, guys, don't be depressed. I'm moving on to new things. Here, have an apple. And he just flies off in his jetpack, and I'm like, this is exactly how people see Steve Wozniak. He's like what we think the Wizard of Oz is going to be. Whereas Steve Jobs is the actual Wizard of Oz. And if you know the books, you know exactly how much of an insult that is.
Yeah.
The idea versus the reality. But I love this scene, and like afterwards, you see Jobs just losing his shit.
Screaming in his car. Before he goes to his back to his parents' house to look at the garage before he cries with his dad.
And I love
trying to call John Scully and all his other friends, can't get a hold of anybody.
And I love how he goes back to working on the same project we saw him at the garage right at the start of the show.
Yeah,
it's brilliant almost, and. This, of course, and I love how his father's trying to comfort him, because I think in a very real sense, he always knew the monster his son was, and now his son knows the monster he is.
And I think the idea is he knew his son was a bit of a layabout, so that he finally found something and built a great company.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think that's what his dad was happy for, is that you did what I wanted you to do. You went out and you found something, and you did it, and now, you're sort of losing it. And because I guarantee his folks probably heard what was going on.
Well, and to me, this is
what was going on.
This is like his dad, seeing his son basically repeat a mistake he did back in the day, except now on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
But, as we all know, this was not the end of the great demon known as Steve Jobs, because what happens? Oh, Apple fucked up, we're in dire shits, something needs to be done, IBM's kicking our ass. Hey, let's call Steve Jobs back.
Yes. Also, by the way, we should mention here, because since we're getting near the end, when he was voted out by the board with John Scully, turning against him, they needed a unanimous vote, and what happened was Mike Markula, who Jobs thought was on his side, didn't want to vote, and Arthur Rock's like, well, the vote's got to be unanimous, and then he hesitantly raises his hand and doesn't look at Steve.
Well, because he knew it was, if he didn't, they would force him out too.
Well, yeah, I know that's messed up how Mike Marcoula voted against him, but I think Mike was peer pressured into it by everybody to make that vote. Arthur Rock, John Scully, but as you were saying, Jherick, the company started doing bad.
And for a little historical side thing on Mr. Scully, he wasn't just, the Apple guy. This was the guy who got Apple to kick Coca-Cola's ass for the first time in the 1980s after that whole new Coke formula thing in 86.
Oh, you mean Pepsi?
Pepsi, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, he was the guy who took Pepsi over Coke for the very first time in the 1980s. The choice of the new generation, which, by the way, I still remember that advertising campaign. Very successful. But, Scully was a big deal back in the day. And for him to basically have Jobs go off on him for some of the Macintosh 2 failures, which, by the way, my mother owned a Macintosh 2. In fact, we owned Commodore 64, Macintosh 2, the Apple IIe. Yeah, I own a bunch of them.
Honestly, even though they go into the design of the modern day computer like we have today, but at the same time, too, I'll say, for the time in the early to mid 80s, when you see them build that thing and see where they put the keyboard inside the computer itself, the keyboard, can extend, can go outside the computer.
And, I mean, it was,
all these things. It was revolutionary and very cool.
It was, and it was very successful. Hell, even Bloom County referenced it with their Banana Junior 9000 computers that Oliver Wendell Jones uses in Bloom County, who, by the way, is one of my favorite characters in Bloom County. Shout out to Mr. Berkeley Breathed, for those who know. But, then we see him come back to Apple, and immediately it doesn't take long to realize Steve Jobs is...
While starting his computer company next, which really didn't get off the ground.
Yeah, but, they did incorporate it into Apple, so, he did eventually kind of get it back. But instantly, when he comes back to the new Apple offices, you can see already Steve Jobs is already in full Jobs mode. Which,
before you continue, to give you the idea, the current CEO, Gil Amelio, asked Jobs to come back at the behest of Mike Marcoula, who asked him to bring him in.
And by the way, people, I know, it gets tiring me making these references, but you all let the vampire in, this is on you. Because instantly it's like, would you like me to show you around, Mr. Jobs? No, I'll show myself around.
Yeah.
That should have been the very first clue of what was going to happen.
Well, because that's what Mike says, I'll let you around. No, I'm going to look myself.
And no sooner does this happen than we start seeing him laying the groundwork for what we know is about to occur.
With all the young tech kids and everybody else.
With first, him laying the job he's going to do on Mr. Emiliero, getting him out of the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, he got the whole board on his side with that one.
And finalizing with his great coup d'etat, forcing Mike Merkel out.
Well, not only that, the entire board, except for the two executives sitting to his side.
And I love how, the very last shot we see is the successful advertising campaign for, I believe it was the iPod.
Yeah.
And we also get to see the final Pokemon evolution of Steve Jobs, where he's in full douchebag mode. But we also get to see when he was working on those. And, I mean, I'm sorry, people, but I hated the 90s Apples. They were very ugly. I could not stand them.
Well, remember, we saw them, the color... I mean, they were simple to look up, but the color coding and their sort of look was bizarre.
I mean, look, I'm sorry, but...
I always wanted a green one. I don't know why, probably because I like the color green, but other than that, I don't know what the hell I wanted to do.
But, I mean, again, we see that this is Jobs. This is who he is, and I think at this point... Hell, I think even before this, he knew this is who he always was. He was always going to be this person.
Well, even his wife knew when they asked him to come back. She's like, I know what you're doing. Well, he's like, what? I'm just going to go there to see.
And there's a scene earlier where we see his second wife, and what does he name his daughter with her? The one he recognizes?
Lisa, yeah.
Lisa, because he never let that go. He never lets anything go. When he gets back to Apple, his first order of business, I'm ruining everybody who in my mind ruined me. And then I'm taking back what's mine. And he does.
One again, like we talked about, maybe in a way we can't blame him for Mike Marcoula for doing that, but at the same time, too...
But Jobs doesn't see it that way. To him, it's
and he treated him the same way Mike did when he got let go. Doesn't look at him, Mike's there, the golden parachute. But the thing is, what I said, what was messed up with that when we talked about when we saw the movie was Mike helped him get back in. I don't know if that was just a movie or if that was true or not, but Mike helped him get back in, and then Sword of Damocles.
And I mean,
golden parachute, take the money, Mike.
But I mean, this kind of leads to like my final thoughts on this. This is really kind of the pain of this because Steve Jobs, he was a brilliant, design man. He was a brilliant sales guy. He was a brilliant marketeer. The problem is he might have been too good at what he did. Me and Boku both kind of bounced this idea around towards the end of the movie. Apple was never the same without him. I mean, they really, Apple has just become a brand now. You get Apple because your parents got it.
It's a name, yeah.
Like, for me, in my family, I was always the black sheep because I could never stand Apple computers. To me, it was just the crazy cat lady computer.
Oh, neither could me or my family. Well, my mom owns an Apple phone, but I think other than the Apple phones and maybe, like, the tablets, that's all we currently have.
Because, I mean, something they didn't really bring up in this movie because, they kind of didn't cover the 90s years all that in depth in this movie, which I think was a good choice because we all know how much of a shitbag he was during this time. But one thing that they missed because of this was there was a second big advertising disaster he did in the 90s where he's boasting to the world, the computer's so reliable that they never get hacked or they can't be hacked. And the world's biggest hacker group just kind of got to fire up their ass on this, and they put out a full-page ad repudiation of him saying the reason nobody hacks Apple computers is because they're the most boring computers in the entire world. It's nothing but like PowerPoint and word processor programs. There's nothing fun. The only people who use Apple computers are people who are obsessed with business. And this is kind of true. It's really like, Boku himself was mentioning how these computers were almost entirely designed from the ground up around just that, the function of like, organizing data, PowerPoint presentations, Venn diagram diagrams, organizing data for like business specs. It's basically the entire thing of it. But you don't really do anything else with an Apple computer. You don't play games on it. You don't Photoshop. It's really just a work computer, and that's what it's designed for. And, again, Jobs being the egomaniac he is, and, all these hackers just come together like, we don't hack your computers because nobody wants to fucking use them for anything but business. And honestly, even the bigger businesses don't really use Apple as much as they think they do. Like, if you go overseas, they don't even use American computers. The Japanese, the Chinese, they don't use American computers. They use their own computers. Even a lot of the European countries largely don't use a lot of our American stuff because, well, it's kind of, how should I put this? It's kind of like a Lamborghini. It's really fun if you take it out on the Autobahn, but you're not really going to do anything much else with it because that's, it's designed to be a speed hog. That's all it is. It's just a big pocket rocket to have fun with. But you're not going to use it for work. You're not going to pick up the kids in it. You're not going to get your groceries in it. It's pretty much a one-trick pony. You get it for that one thing. And Steve Jobs never really understood this. And yeah, he designed Apple both as a company and a business really well. But he was the only man who understood how it worked.
Yeah.
In fact, my grandfather had the exact same problem. If any of you are familiar with like the local newspapers out in Tucson, Arizona, we used to have two of them, the Citizen and the Star. And my grandfather used to be the guy who was in charge of the advertising division. And he was good at it. Like, seriously, when he retired, they named the conference room after him. They hired a mariachi band, the works. The only problem is nobody else knew how to run the advertising division after he left, and this led to the collapse of the TNI newspapers. Now the Tucson Citizen, now the Star is the only paper we have, and it's like this thin. It used to be like this back in the day. They had editorials, they had sports, they had everything. It's skinnier than a comic book these days. That's what happens when you have a guy who's too good at this one thing that keeps the whole business afloat, and then he's gone. And that's kind of what's destroying video games these days. It's all legacy, but all those great legacy guys have been pushed out. They're gone. Nobody can do what they do anymore. And that's kind of the real tragedy of this. Steve Jobs did cement a legacy. He became one of the biggest names that ever existed. But just remember, a legacy doesn't always necessarily mean it's a good legacy.
Absolutely.
Because again, you can be Jesus or you can be Lucifer. You can be John Lennon or you can be Paul McCartney. Or again, you can be Steve Jobs, or you can be Steve Wozniak.
Yep. Well then, to that point, since it seems to be the end of your thoughts on it, characters and your favorite actors in this movie, Jherick.
I can't believe I'm saying this, people, but thanks to Boku, here we are. Mr. Ashton Kutcher, you take top honors.
Oh, he had to. Steve Jobs.
My hat's off to you.
His performance was good.
You have officially reached the heights of Jim Carrey level. Now, please start taking more dramatic roles, for God's sakes. Oh, and also, Demi Moore, have better taste in men. I'm just saying. Yeah, he was the only asshole good enough to play Steve Jobs this well. Second place goes to Mr. Wozniak, again.
Josh Gad, yep. Steve
the
Wozniak.
Wonderful Wizard of Woz. I tip my hat to you, good
Again,
sir.
like I said, one of my favorite roles he's done because I'm not the biggest Josh Gad fan.
I know, how crazy is this? And for the third place, I'm going to give this to Mr. God, what was his name? The Pepsi Cola guy?
Oh, John Scully, played by Matthew Modine.
John Scully had some really great emotional moments when he's going back and forth with Steve Jobs.
Oh, yeah.
I could have given this to the third place to a lot of people, but choice of a new generation, you get this one.
Well, then there you go. And then, any more final thoughts before we conclude?
It's kind of a shame because, again, I grew up with this stuff. I remember all of these disasters. And, again, Steve Jobs, you did change the industry. You changed a lot. But, maybe sometimes it's better to not change too much because you and Wozniak had a good thing when you were just, two guys having fun in your garage.
Yep.
Sometimes a legacy costs a little too much.
Hey, he definitely has left a legacy behind. That much is certain.
So did Hitler, but, people don't want to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah, well, no, of course not. But what do they say for people like Jobs and stuff? Often replicated, but never duplicated.
Thank God for that, man.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, probably be the same thing with, I'll admit this. Jobs may not have been the nicest person, but here's the thing, because you have to say it nowadays, he's probably going to leave behind a better legacy than what's his name, Bill Gates.
And again, big shout out to G4, well, back in the day, for giving us Code Monkeys and the introduction of my favorite phrase, the Wonderful Wizard of Woz.
Well, then again, you guys just let us know what you think down in the comments below. Just talk to us about the movie, what you think of Jobs and all the other ones we've done. And until then, this is Owen Tuboku and
the choice of a new generation. Hey.
Have a good one, guys.
Someone's going to get